Tonight I want to speak on the subject of no backing down. No backing down. When I think about that phrase, I think about the miracle on ice. It was probably the most famous hockey game that was ever played. It happened during the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid, New York, and it was played between the Soviet Union and the United States hockey team. And here's the thing. The Soviet Union was stacked with professional players. Their team was made up of players that played in the National Hockey League professionally. The American Olympic team was young guys. Many of them had just gotten out of college. They weren't professional. And obviously the Soviets were picked to win that game. They were huge favorites. Nobody was giving the United States a chance. I mean, how could those young boys compete with those professional players? And yet the U.S. ended up upsetting the Soviet team and won 4-3. From there they went on to win the Olympic gold medal. Those young guys refused to back down. They refused to be intimidated by the size or the experience of the Soviet hockey team. Now, last week, we looked at the land that was given to the 2.5 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Reuben, the tribe of Gad, and the 1/2 tribe of Manasseh, because we've reached the place in Joshua where they're in the promised land and Joshua is beginning to distribute the inheritance. And these 2.5 tribes, if you remember, chose to live east of the Jordan. In other words, they came in, helped Israel defeat the enemies, but they wanted to go back across east of the Jordan, and that's where they wanted to live. The reason is because there was land there that was appealing to them. The problem was choosing to live outside of the land of Canaan made them extremely vulnerable. And we talked about that last week, that what happened with these 2.5 tribes was their heart drifted from God, they began to worship other gods, and eventually they were exiled by the Syrians. And the lesson we learned last week with those 2.5 tribes, don't be a marginal believer. Don't be a borderline believer. Don't try to live as close to the world as you can. If you're going to go for it, go 100% for Jesus. Don't back down. Now tonight, I want to talk about 2.5 other tribes, and I don't plan on talking about all of the inheritance of the 12 tribes, because tonight is the last teaching for the book of Joshua. But I do want to look at the 2.5 tribes that included Caleb. The 2.5 tribes that included Caleb. And these tribes were tribes of Judah and Ephraim and the other 1/2 tribe of Manasseh, okay? And the allotment is very important, again, because it specifies a gentleman named Caleb and even his family. If you know anything about Caleb, you know that Caleb was a good man. You know Caleb was one of the 12 spies that Moses had sent out to spy out the promised land. And if you remember that story, 10 of those spies came back with a terrible report. A report of doubt, a report of discouragement. They said to Israel, there's no way we can defeat the giants in the land. There's no way that God can help us be victorious. We should not go and possess the land. And it was only Joshua, and there he is, Caleb. Joshua and Caleb that believed God, and they came back with a positive report. They said, yes, there's challenges in the land, but our God is able to give us the victory. So we know that Caleb was a special guy who was focused. After spending 40 years in the wilderness, think about that. After spending 40 years in the wilderness, Caleb and Joshua and Israel crossed the Jordan. They defeated the enemies of Jericho and Ai and other cities, and now the inheritance is being distributed. And here we read where his faith is an example of courage and determination, and I find it inspiring. When you talk about faith, faith has to be partnered with determination. You got to have a bulldog kind of faith. You got to have the kind of faith that says, I'm not going to back down. So let's look at Joshua chapter 14 and pick it up in verse number 11. Notice what Caleb said. I am still strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. As my strength was then, so my strength is now, for war, for going out and coming in. Now then, give me this hill country about which the Lord spoke on that day. For you heard on that day," he's talking to Joshua, "you heard on that day that Achan were there with great fortified cities. Perhaps the Lord will be with me, and I will drive them out as the Lord has spoken." So we see here as Caleb communicates to Joshua about the distribution of his inheritance, that he wanted a certain piece of land, and that's what God had promised him when Moses was still alive. Now here's the deal. At this time, he's 85 years old. 85 years old. And he was still in it to win it. Even though 40-some years had passed since the promise first came to him about the land, he was still in it to win it, and he wasn't going to back down. I understand, because I'm a little older, I understand that getting older means that maybe we slow down a little bit, or maybe we don't have the energy level that we used to have, or we can't do the physical things that we used to do. But listen to me. Getting older doesn't mean we have to lose our passion for Jesus. Getting older doesn't mean we have to lose our vision for accomplishing what God still wants to accomplish in our life. There's no retiring, there's only refiring for the Lord. So the more we can do for the Lord, we should do. Age is never an excuse. So really, we have to ask ourselves, this guy, 85 years old, still willing to go up and fight for the land, still willing to engage his faith and determination to get the inheritance that God promised him. What was his secret? What was he drinking? What was he eating? What kind of supplements was he taking? Well, it was none of those things. We're told in Deuteronomy one time, and we're told here in the book of Joshua 4 other times, that Caleb totally followed the Lord. That was his secret. He totally followed the Lord. Not partially followed the Lord, not followed the Lord when it was convenient or comfortable, but every day of his life, he totally followed the Lord. You know, I think about what Paul said in the great statement in Galatians chapter 6, verse number 9. Paul said, "Let us not lose heart in doing good, for in due time we will reap if we don't grow weary." That's what the Apostle Paul said. In other words, you can't back down. In other words, no matter how old we are, we have to stay focused, we have to stay determined, and we have to realize that God still wants us to accomplish things for Him. So what's the application? It's simple. Are we willing to believe God? Are we willing to obey God? Are we willing to do what we need to do to see God provide what He has promised to provide for us? Because the truth of the matter is, He provides for people in their teens, He provides for people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s, and yes, even people in their 80s or 90s. If we're willing to believe, if we're willing to totally follow the Lord, then, and not back down, God is still going to do things in and through our life. So as we wrap this study up in Joshua, I want to just pull some life lessons that I think you and I can learn from Caleb. Here's the first one. There's no retiring from faith and service. Again, 85 years old, still going strong, still determined, not willing to back down. I think another one is that Caleb wasn't a surface, shallow, or small-minded person. He was a man of content, he was a man of character, he was a man of commitment, and he was a man of vision. And the third thing is that people with vision, listen to this, people with vision that truly comes from the Lord, they have an uncommon depth to them. They have a resilient spirit. They're reassuring. and they're inspiring to all of us. I look at Caleb and I think at times we must be willing to be different and take a stand, because it was only he and Joshua that took a stand against the 10 spies. They were outnumbered. They were in the minority, but they said, hey, we can possess the land. God will help us possess the land. And so sometimes we have to just take a stand, and even if we're in the minority. Here's another thought. While others dwell on giants and problems and challenges, the Calebs of life dwell on the mountains of promise, and they keep moving forward. Why some people are intimidated by what's before them and the challenges in their life, the Calebs don't back down. They keep moving forward in faith. And I would say, last of all, obtaining God's promises requires patience. Patience. And that doesn't come easy. We have to want it more than anything else. And if we want it more, and we know that God wants it for us, then we are willing to patiently wait on God. And when we patiently wait, we have to push through the tough times. Caleb waited 40-some years, and at 85, he said, I'm ready to take what God had promised. And I see here that Caleb really left a spiritual legacy, because here I am talking about him tonight. But most importantly, his faith affected his family, particularly his only daughter. If you read in the book of Joshua, you know that she imitated the faith of her father, because she went to her father and made a bold request. He had blessed her with land because of her wedding, and she needed water for that land. She went to her dad and she boldly asked him, you bless me with land, but I need you to bless me with water. And Caleb not only blessed her, he blessed her beyond. He gave her springs in the north and springs in the south to water her land. His legacy of faith and determination and an unwillingness to back down is what really helped her, and she carried on his legacy. So my friend, there's a lot we can learn from Joshua. We can learn about leadership. We can learn about faith. We can learn about determination. We can learn about perseverance. And I would say in closing, we need more Calebs in the church today. We need more Joshuas in the church today. We need men and women that will stand up and not back down when people try to push against us. We have a message, we have a hope, we have a God who's able to do exceeding abundantly beyond what we could ever ask or think. So let's keep moving forward for Him. Hey, I want to take an opportunity right now to invite you to our Christmas Eve services. December the 24th, we are moving our services from the morning to the afternoon. December 24th, Christmas Eve, 4 p.m., 6 p.m., 2 services, candlelight services. Bring your family, special music. It's going to be a great, great day as we celebrate Christmas together. Take care, my friend.